Ladies and gentlemen, good evening to you and welcome, all 256 of you so far, to this lecture, monthly Wellington Heritage Lecture. You're very welcome, and I particularly this month welcome members of the Nautical Research Guild in the United States, and I believe in other places overseas as well, and also Mr. Ian McLaughlin and the Society, his Society of Model Shipwrights, who have also been, I believe, circulated and have registered for this lecture as well. So you and all our regular followers are most welcome. Before we start, if I may, I'll just give you the usual brief housekeeping notes. You may leave and can leave messages or questions for our speaker, Simon Stevens, this evening by using the Q&A button at the bottom. Next to it is a chat button. Don't use the chat button for this particular purpose, because we will be checking during the lecture and putting forward at the end your questions to the speaker on the Q&A button. At the end of the lecture, do please stay on and chat. We have a wash up, and there's always something of great interest to be shared there with those who do attend. Simon Stevens, our honoured speaker tonight, honourable speaker, is very kindly staying on afterwards for a while, which is good. But in all, we will hope probably to be sort of terminating, pulling the button, depending on how the wash-up goes, at around about 8 o'clock this evening. There will be, as always, a recording made of this lecture. Simon has very kindly agreed to that. And that will be, the notification for that will be sent to you, all those who have registered, and can also be found at any time, along with previous lectures in our lecture series, on the Wellington Trust site on www.thewellingtontrust.org. I think that actually completes the housekeeping notes, thank goodness. We are delighted to have a return speaker. Simon spoke to us last month, March, on another aspect of the National Maritime Museum. He is curator of the Ship Model and Boats collection, and he is most welcome back with us today. Just to check, Simon has over 40 years experience, sorry Simon, working with the National Maritime Museum, and he is currently the curator. He is a specialist in the ship model collection and the small craft collection, and his experiences across multiple maritime areas is widely recognized, working with organizations including the founding of the National Maritime Museum's branch in Cornwall and Chatham Historic Dockyard, of which you will hear much more during this lecture. He was also a consultant historian for the construction of the Royal Row Barge, Gloriana, for the Queen's Diamond Jubilee celebrations back in 2012. It's now my great pleasure to welcome Simon to this evening's event. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you very much, Alistair. Just call up the my apologies, I've pushed the wrong button. Oh, there we go. Right, sorry about that. Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for welcoming me back, Alistair, to give this talk on ship models. What I'm going to try and do tonight, and it's a very brief dance through, thousands of years of history, but I'll do my best to try and touch on most of the major points. The talk will be in two parts. There's a slide presentation first, and then following that will be a video presentation of the work that I've done with endoscopy and such like, and I'll explain that throughout the slide lecture. I'll touch on points of that. Unfortunately, I can't link the videos into the slide presentation on technical reasons, so we'll just have to go with that, I'm afraid. As Alistair said, I've had the privilege of working at Greenwich now for, I think I'm in my 44th year. And when I joined the museum as a trainee curator, I joined from day one with the model collection and stayed with it ever since. So I'm really quite privileged to be working with these amazing objects. Just briefly, the National Maritime Museum is probably got the largest collection of ship models in the world, around about 4,600 models in all told. The collection really goes way back beyond the museum. I mean, the museum is quite young by national standards, wasn't open until 1937, but the actual collection of models goes way back to the early 19th century when it was being formed by Sir Robert Seppings, who was Surveyor of the Navy at Somerset House, and he assembled some models for teaching and training aids for his students and what have you. And then obviously it started to outgrow its premises, and by 1851, just after the Great Exhibition in South Kensington, the South Kensington Museum was set up on the proceeds of the Great Exhibition, of which within that organisation, the School of Naval Architecture was formed in 1864. And obviously the models started rolling in from various sources. They also received models for patents, which I will touch upon later on. Again, that collection soon outgrew the premises, and it was decided to transfer the maritime collections to the Royal Naval College at Greenwich, which are now the buildings across the road from the National Maritime Museum as we are situated today. And then in 1934, the National Maritime Museum Act was created. The collection was then transferred from the Royal Naval College to the museum in 1936, and it was just and then it was opened by the King in 1937. So this first slide shows the actual model room at Somerset House in the early 1840s, and you can see there the range of models on display. You've got half models, full hull models. You've got a model hanging from the ceiling. And in the centre where the people are gathered, we think is a model of HMS Queen, and we've still got that model in the collection. It's a very large scale model. And here is the opening of the museum in April 1937. And centre stage, apart from the royal family, of course, is a ship model, quite rightly. It's a model of the Sovereign of the Seas, a 19th century interpretation of the 17th century warship. So starting with our earliest example of a, shall we say, a model in the collection is this interesting model of an Egyptian funerary barge that was recovered from a tomb in Thebes around about 1800 BC. So this is, if you like, our oldest example of a model in the loosest sense. It's not a scale model, so to speak, but it's nevertheless it's a model in its senses there. It's made from fig wood. We've had the wood tested over the years, and it shows a funerary barge, a downriver funerary barge, and upriver would have the mast and sail. And I'll just show you a detail of the figures on there. It's got an esophagus in the midship section, complete with the rowers as well. It's an incredibly fragile model, as you can understand, being of that age. And it's currently on display in our Sea Things gallery at the museum, if you want to go and view it. Moving on, I mean, a huge leap in terms of time. The earliest English model is the Ashmolean model as we know it, and that's in the Ashmolean Museum, and that dates from around about 1610. But our next earliest model is this votive model. It's a Dutch votive model, and these were models that were hung in churches for religious reasons, and it dates from about 1647, and it's of a Dutch East Indiaman. Now they weren't true to scale. They're sort of the proportions were slightly out. They were built and designed to be viewed from below. You can see along the hull you've got a sort of wavy line showing the water line, and the guns that will tend to be exaggerated on these models. It's fully rigged with original rigging, and there's a nice shot of the stern as well, and you can see the metal bar going up between the main and foremast, which is on how it was hung from the ceiling or from an archway. Carved from a solid block of wood and then gouged out internally with decks added, and then the rigging is stepped onto the keelson through the mast. So that's 1747. As we move into 1647, this is our earliest, what we call true scale model, circa 1650. Okay, so this is just before Samuel Pepys and his diary, but we know he was a keen collector of ship models. There are several mentions of ship models in his diaries, and this represents a third rate of a warship of 50 to 58 guns. And it's interesting at this period, these models are starting to be built at the 1/4 inch to the foot scale, 1/48 scale. And later on in the 17th century, when the plans started appearing, they're also drawn at that scale. Now, we haven't got any plans going back that far in the collection that sort of sit with these models for that date, but this is our earliest true scale navy board model. Now, we use the term navy board. If you look below the waterline, the main waterline, all the frames have been exposed. They're not planked over. And these frames are actually stylized. They're not built as the ship was actually framed. They'd be much closer together, and some of the frames and futtocks have been removed. So we call this the sort of navy board style. And at this stage, they're interested in the shape. The navy board are interested in the shape, the layout of the guns, and the decoration on the actual ship itself. Moving on to sort of 1669, this is our earliest identified navy board model of the St. Michael, which was a second rate of 98 guns, a beautiful model in largely original condition, fully rigged, with some later additions in the decoration. By this time, you'll notice that there is more and more planking along the sides of the ship. You've got gun port lids. This model is rigged with guns rigged out, ready for firing. And also the decoration is much more apparent, which has been actually picked out with gold leaf or gold paint. Again, built at a 1/48 scale. And we think this model may have belonged to Sir Robert Holmes, who was a former captain of the actual ship. We recently found this out when we tracked down his will, and there were 2 ship models mentioned in his will. So, you know, we can't say for certain that this was his model, but it's the likelihood it is, because models of this size and scale were quite clearly made for very rich and important people. These weren't working models. They would have cost too much to build and taken too long to make. So it's quite probable that this belonged to Sir Robert Holmes or someone of that ilk. Now, these models were largely made of fruit wood, boxwood, apple, pear, English pear, because they're slow growing and there's hardly any grain. So what you don't want is something like pine or oak, which is very hard to work at this scale. And pine has got a very pronounced grain, and it would actually throw out the scale of the model itself. And we were also able to identify a lovely shot there of the stern decoration of a typical late 17th century warship. We were also able to identify this model by very careful certain measurements, the length of the gun deck, and also comparing it against contemporary drawings of the ship drawn by the Van der Velde, the younger and the elder, who were Dutch artists that came over in the mid 17th century and set up a studio in the Queen's House, which is on our site between the 2 wings of the museum. And this shows the St. Michael at anchor with various figures on to give scale, getting ready to set sail. By the time we come to the end of the 17th century, scale plans start to appear on a more regular basis. We can't say for certain whether there were scale plans at an earlier period, that certainly some have survived, but not in great numbers. But by the end of the 17th century, in the early 18th century, plans have been saved and drawn at that 1/48 scale. They're quite plain at this stage. You've got a profile and a section below showing some decoration, layout of the guns, and you've got sections going along the profile at the top of the actual hull section itself as well. As we go into the 18th century, the plans become much more detailed, and they show the various decks involved, some of the chain plates for the rigging, some of the fittings, such as the capstans, the position of the masts, that sort of thing, the orlop deck, and the accommodation at the stern, the quarter galleries, and that sort of thing. Now, what we do know for sure is that the models that were used in tandem with these plans, the working models, is what you see before you here, the block models. These could be made relatively cheaply, fairly quickly, and were quite robust. They were made in what we call bread and butter fashion, where you get a series of horizontal planks, which are then screwed and glued together, carved in the shape of a hull, and then in some cases painted up to show the actual shape of the hull itself. And these are quite robust. They're quite heavy. Some have been gouged out to reduce the weight, but you could actually put these in road transport at the time, or send it round by a small boat from the dockyards up to London for discussion alongside with a scale plan. And an order was issued in 1715 saying you should, to the master shipwrights of each of the royal dockyards, 6 royal dockyards, saying, please send your designs for a third rate with drawings and a block or solid. And this is what they would send together with their plans. This is quite an interesting little model. This is in a sort of presentation folio in a wooden box, and you've got the scale plan, and then in a flat profile, you've got the sections of a little 6-rate warship lying flat. Now at the bow, towards your right-hand side, I don't know if you can see my cursor here, there's a string, and if you pull that string, that's what happens. The model pops up in its 3-dimensional form. So this was clearly a sort of way of convincing the Navy board, probably from a private dockyard, because these ships were built in the smaller private dockyards on the Thames as opposed to the royal dockyards, as a sort of publicity tool for the shipwright. And that's a 6-rate of about 1720. And there are other examples of these around in private collections. As we move into the 18th century now, you'll notice that the models, still at 1:48 scale, are starting to become more realistic. They're getting fully planked below the waterline. This one is rigged, complete with sails. This is the earliest example we know of with original sails. This is Tartar, HMS Tartar, 1734. We've had the sails conserved because obviously they were quite fragile when it came to us. And you can see below the waterline, there's a couple of planks have been taken away to expose the framing as well. Again, stylized framing. Moving into the mid-18th century, this is a very important model that was commissioned by Lord Sandwich, who was the First Lord of the Admiralty, and was trying to convince George III to get interested in the Navy, to convince Parliament to put more money across to developing the Navy. And Sandwich commissioned a series of models of the various rates of warships together with the dockyard models, which you'll see shortly. And this is the first rate, the Royal George, which was launched in 1756, although the model was made in the 1770s, which is when Sandwich was trying to convince George III to become interested in the Navy. And on the one side, it shows on the port side, which is the side you can see here, it's got exposed frames where you can partially look into the model. And then on the starboard side, it's fully planked. But the detail in this model is actually quite incredible, which is why I've got some nice detailed shots. There's a lovely shot here of the stern. You can see the name painted on the stern above the counter. This was a practice they introduced in the 1770s for a short period of time. You'll notice that also that there's quite a bit of interesting materials being used in the construction of the model. You've got animal bone used for the stern lanterns, some of the balustrades and the balconies on the stern galleries, and the window frames as well, and the doors. The carving on this is absolutely outstanding. Because this was such a high profile model made for George III, there's quite a bit of archive material about the construction of it and who made the various parts, which is pretty much unknown, certainly in the 17th century and almost that in the 18th century as well. So Thomas Burroughs was the carver, and we know who painted the friezes on the side of the hull, a chap called Marshall as well. And there's a close-up detail of the figurehead here. I mean, it's just extraordinary. I mean, this figurehead is probably about 10 centimeters in height from a single piece of wood, possibly box. And you can see the sort of detail on the horse's chest. You can see the veins and the flared nostrils. I mean, it's quite exceptional in its quality and detail. And it's probably one of the best 18th century models that's in existence. As part of the set of the models that was presented to George III, he was also interested to know how a ship was actually built. And this shows a ship, the Intrepid, which was a third rate of 1774, actually how it was framed. So this isn't stylized framing, this is how the ship was built. And you'll notice there's hardly any spacing between the frames. And all the various different parts have been labeled with paper labels stuck to them so that you could actually learn the various parts from a shipwright. Again, 1:48 scale. This is one of the 6 models that were commissioned by Sandwich again of the Royal Dockyards in the 1770s. This is Portsmouth Dockyard. And the idea was that you could look at this model or the models and actually see how a ship was constructed. Now I'll move on to the next one, which shows the great storehouse at Deptford in the Deptford Dockyard model. And you'll notice that the lower foreground of your picture, there's a barge alongside with actual wood in the round. So you can actually follow the wood going through all the different processes around the dockyard, how it was cut, how it was seasoned, how it was stored. There's even steam trunks. You'll see that at the top of the top right-hand side of the image. And then just at the bottom right-hand corner, you've got a ship on the ways in partial frame being erected. And just to the left, top left of the storehouse, there's a ship on a slipway there in the dock being worked on as well. So you could actually, you know, with someone talking you through this, you could actually learn the process of shipbuilding in the 18th century. They're incredibly important models. And the model we have of Chatham Dockyard is currently on display at the dockyard itself. Now, over the years, I've got involved with the use of medical technology to explore these models as to how they're made. And this is not for the faint-hearted. This is a medical endoscope, as you can see, in operation. And by using this piece of equipment, which has digital qualities, we're able to go inside models where the human eye can't see and actually find amazing details like this double capstan from a first rate, the Royal George model. That's the cooking stove up in the forward end of the ship in the forecastle, with a rotisserie at the front of it here. You can see that's the rotisserie here. These are the doors for the bread ovens. And then above here, you've got the large kettles for cooking liquid food, such as broths and that sort of thing, and hot water. And then you've got the lovely elaborate decoration in the stern area where the officers were living. You've got hinged doors up here. You've got this perforated bone surround of a ladderway going down below decks. And within these doors and panels and bulkheads, you've actually got glass as well. And then this is one of the cabins right in the stern. This is the Admiral's cabin, where you've got an absolutely beautifully inlaid parquet floor. You've got a nice stove here and fire hearth to keep the cabin warm, and panelled doors and panelled bulkheads. And these doors are actually hinged and work as well. Now, this is a very important model. It's a third rate 74 gun, the Thebologna, which was launched in 1759, but it shows it much later. And we've always wondered why it was later. We'd assumed it was built in the 1770s, and it was made to show the copper sheathing of warships in the 18th century. And the reason they did this, you'll notice below the waterline, this was to stop weed growth and the marine boring worm to stop damaging the timbers and slowing the ship down. So the idea was they will put copper on the outside of the hull, and in salt water you get an electrolytic reaction which causes a toxin which doesn't allow the weeds to adhere, and it stops and the metal stops the Teredo navalis, the marine boring mollusk worm, from damaging the timbers. Now, the interesting thing about this model is I went inside with an endoscope looking for a note, which I'd been trying for 25 years to find one in our collection. And you'll see at the end of the presentation, in the video presentation, the results of that. So I won't say any more on that one. This is me actually using this on another model, a third rate of 1740. Now, you've got the added complication here of rigging. So you've got to be very, very careful when you go inside these models. And there aren't many places where you can actually go into a model either through the gun port or through the main hatch, because obviously a rig model, you can't go down through the mast aperture because the masts are in the way. And you'll notice on the right-hand side, the image, this is literally the moment I pulled out this little cardboard figure from the depths of the hull. And again, I'll talk you through that with the video presentation at the end. And there he is. That's the cardboard figure that was retrieved from the inside of that model that hasn't seen the light of day since 1740. And he's nicknamed Bernie after a colleague of mine who worked with me for many, many years, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago. So, but you'll notice he's also wearing the typical shipwright's cap as well. So, and it's been printed as part of a lithograph of some sort. So it's been cut out. But sadly, when we turned it over, expecting to find a signature or a little note or anything like that, there was nothing on the back, which was a real shame. As we move into the late 18th century, you're getting all sorts of ideas coming forward. This is a typical cutter, but it's quite shallow, you'll notice in the draft, and it's got 3 drop keels, which one at the stern, one amidships, and one at the bow here. And these were developed by Captain Shank. And the idea being was that you can actually go into shallow waters if you're doing surveys and what have you, and by dropping your drop keels or cinder boards, you could actually still sail without giving up too much leeway. By the end of the 18th century, early 19th century, you've got the Napoleonic Wars in full swing, and a lot of French prisoner of war were kept here in the UK at various prisons up and down the country, and they would receive a weekly ration of meat on the bone, and they would obviously boil down the bones and make all sorts of things from the bone. One of which became very, very popular was ship models, the prisoner of war models that you can see in front of you here. And they had all sorts of weird and wonderful features. I mean, bearing in mind they didn't have any scale plans to work from, so this was all done from memory. So it's quite remarkable, and they had limited tools, limited materials. It's quite remarkable that they were able to produce a model of this sort of detail and quality. What you do tend to find is that the proportions tend to go awry a bit. You know, the length and steep or angle of the bowsprit can be exaggerated, as can the height of the mast. And in some cases, you get both the French and the British features on one model. So one has to be, but the story itself is really interesting. And they also built them in wood as well, because they had wood to hand. And that's the sort of detail they were able to achieve. You know, at the early part of the Napoleonic Wars, the models were quite small and quite crude, but as they got into the end of the wars, into the early 19th century, they were really becoming quite professional about it. And they were made by individuals who had different crafts. You'd have a tinsmith, a carver, probably a shipwright, that sort of thing. And then you had models carved in ivory, obviously from the ivory carvers of Dieppe, who are, you know, that was a world centre for carving ivory at the time in the 18th and 19th century. And the lovely little wooden case that it's in, it's got straw work decoration on it, which they would use from their mattresses, which they would then colour with different inks and paints. And there's a surface silvered mirror in the back to reflect out light, to give it this sort of ghost-like feeling. Moving well into the 19th century now, you start to see the emergence of what we would call the early forms of builders models, which is a style of model that became really central to the 19th century. This is the Scalby Castle, which was an East Indiaman of about 1810. Again, a full hull, fairly plain model, bearing in mind these were built in the private dockyards, not the Royal Naval dockyards. Same scale, 1:48 scale. And these would be given to the owners of the vessels probably, or kept in the dockyards to actually publicise what they were able to do. Again, you've got another form of framing, actual framing here on a mid-19th century merchantman. And then in the 19th century, we've got a series of models in the collection which are working toys. We think this is probably one of the oldest working toys in existence. It's of a steam yacht, a mythical named Dolphin, and it was made for the children of the Duke of Northumberland. It's got a clockwork engine which drives the paddles. You can lift away the deck to reveal the clockwork mechanism, and also the stern deck to reveal the accommodation in the model as well. The interesting thing about this model is it was signed and dated by the maker, a chap called Alan Hunt, who, as far as we know, well, we do know that he was a professional model maker, restorer, who worked out of Southwark in the late 18th century. We've got one of his business cards in the collection. And you'll notice here that he was 81 when he made this model in 1822. So he lived to be a ripe old age and still making quality models. And we've got a number of models in the collection which we think are by his hand. Again, into the middle part and later part of the 19th century, you've got a whole series of models that were made for patents. You were having models made of parts of ships. You didn't need to have the whole ship made in a model form. And this is a cross-section of the Warrior, Britain's first ironclad of 1860. This shows the launching cradle supports for a late 19th century warship. And then we've got a pattern model here of Cunningham's roller reefing gear. So you were able to, rather than go up the masts and actually haul the sail in by hand, you were able to actually roll the top yard and the sail would go up with the bottom yard, rather like a Venetian blind. And it was actually used on board the ships as well. All sorts of ordnance, from mortars to gun carriages and also carronades. This beautiful model is again for a patent of Blake's Cooking Gallery of 1865, fully working with working doors and ovens and bread ovens, and you've got these lovely brass taps on the side for hot water. The kettles are at the top here with the lids. It really is a beautiful model. And on one side you've got the cooking apparatus for the officers, and on the other side, which is a bit basic, more basic, is the side for the actual crew itself. And then again, you've got all these amazing inventions going on in the 19th century. This is a life car that was launched from the beach. The paddles were hand cranked by a crew inside. And the idea was that you would be able to paddle out to a ship just off the shore that was needed the crew or passengers rescuing that was floundering. This was Captain Manby's life-saving rocket. He would launch this from the shore with a line attached to the from the rocket. It would tangle into the rigging. They'd make fast the line, and then they would haul out this this basket, and then the gentleman would jump in, complete with his top hat, into this, and they would haul him ashore. So this was an early form of breeches buoy, which is still in use today, actually, on the UK coasts. And then an early form of lifeboat, 1822, the Tyne lifeboat. You notice it's got cork banding around the bow and stern for buoyancy, and relieving tubes in the waist if the boat was swamped so that it wouldn't overturn. And then again, what's common in the 19th century, you get a lot of models of presentations. Now, the R&I were known, if a donor came along and gave a large amount of money, they would present a model of the lifeboat that they paid for to be built and supported. And this is a typical self-righting lifeboat of the 1860s on its launching carriage. They would launch this into the stern bow first and launch it from there with a team of horses. Another amazing model of the Refuge that was anchored on the Goodwin Sands in the mid-19th century. So this would, because obviously the sands dry out at low tide, and then this would float at high tide. And then on top, you've got a cabin where you would shelter from the bad weather. You've got a mast above that with a signalling semaphore and a lantern for lighting a light. And in those curved sheds on the decks, you've got a couple of boats that you could actually take to and row out to hopefully the ship that was coming to rescue you once you'd flagged them down. This is a series of small boats that were carried on the first-rate warship in the 1830s, ranging from a dinghy on the left-hand side right the way through to a big 42-foot launch for a range of duties. A Royal Pulling Barge of the 1880s, beautifully made. And again, you're getting a whole range of models now appearing in the 19th century. This is a beautiful model made by the builders that used to make these pleasure skiffs on the Thames in the late 19th century. Models were also made for training. You know, they use these large-scale models in the Navy here in the UK for working rigging, on steering the ship, working a capstan, that sort of thing. And we've got a nice example here of a Royal Naval Sailing Association dinghy, 14-foot dinghy, clinker built, and it's complete with all the labels of different component parts that the students and cadets would learn about in how to sail, as well as to to repair. During the 19th century, you get a great deal of what they call half-block models. So you've got a solid block of wood which has been shaped and in some cases gouged out. Again, they were built on the bread and butter principle that I mentioned earlier, and then mounted on a backboard. Some of these were used in the design process, others were used for exhibitions. There was a big international trade exhibitions going on in the mid-19th century onwards into the 20th century. And you find these on the various trade stands of big shipyards advertising their wares, and also in the Royal Dockyards. And then jumping ahead really into the 1950s, the half-block was still being used as a plating model. So this is a wooden model which has then been covered in a white shiny gesso on which you can then ink on the individual plates for making the hull. And you could joggle these plates in relation to the hull frames and the various other fixtures and fitting on the hull before you actually the actual hull went into production. So it's like a three-dimensional plan really that you couldn't really do on a two-dimensional plan. And when you turn them over, obviously there's a different model. You can see how the models were made in bread and butter construction, and you've got a series of pencil marks showing the different lifts taken from the plan to produce the hull form. In some cases, these models were made before the plan. In other cases, the plan was first, then the model. So there's no true form. These are the more basic sort of half models you would get in these smaller coastal yards that would produce like trawlers and barges and that sort of thing for the commercial small fleets, you know, where you've got just a single, you've got a solid bulkhead shaped in the hull form with these battens running along showing the planking runs. Again on a half block. A lot of these were just destroyed or burnt really. And then the sort of top end of the half blocks are these ones that were made for presentation to the owners, in particular yachts, you know, where they wanted a nice model to hang on their office or in their house, or even on board the actual yacht or the vessel that they owned. And you've got the various lines of the hull that show the water lines as well, different coloured woods. And then, as I say, in the 19th century, this is where the builder's model really comes into its own. So again, this 1:48 scale, bread and butter construction, solid hull, gouged out, decked, with all the details, funnels, companionways, paddles, windlasses, that sort of thing. And as we get into the 1880s, 1890s, you start to get these lovely large models of merchant ships. This is the Albatross of 1888. Single screw. So we've still got, you know, the masts and sails as backup, as it were. It's not until the twin screw came into operation and the engines were much better in terms of productivity and economy that the rig started to scale back. And we've got a large collection of these in the RNG collections. This is a builder's model of the Brazilian battleship, the Minas Gerais, launched in 1906. And this is probably the height of the builder's models. And I'll just show you a detail here of the models itself. I mean, it's incredibly detailed and the finish on it is remarkable. You've got silver plated gun barrels. A lot of the fixtures, other fixtures and fittings are gold plated. Reason they're gold and silver plated, certainly gold, was that the fittings didn't tarnish, whereas silver did tarnish, so they had to lacquer them. But it was a way of attracting a prospective client onto the trade stand, either by the dockyard or the owner of the vessel, saying, you know, this is what we built, this is what we own, these are what we use, come and sign a contract with us and we'll make, you know, we'll build or design a ship for you. But you can just see the detail and the quality of the finish of this model. I mean, this model is about over 2 meters in length. I mean, it's vast, you know, and as the ships were getting bigger, the models themselves were getting bigger as well. And they came in these beautifully elaborate cases. This is the Multan of 1923, a P&O ship, in its original display case. And you can see the sort of detail on the uprights here, carved decoration, these finials here. Quite remarkable piece of furniture in their own right. And we regard them as an important part of the object as well. A model of the Normandy, again, used in the offices of the company that operated the ship as a way of attracting potential passengers and clients. And then models were made for other reasons. This is a rather sad story. This was a model that was commissioned by the Court of Inquiry for the Admiralty with the loss of the submarine Thetis. in the Second World War, and it's a model that comes apart longitudinally, and you can see on the top half there's a scale plan showing all the different compartments in the submarine and the bulkheads, and on the bottom half the curved pieces along here, which are the actual ballast tanks, they actually come off as well. So this was used in the court of inquiry for the loss of the submarine. Again, you've got wonderful examples of these types of models on board the Wellington. These are, again, builders' models, gold-plated fittings. By this time after the Second World War, the ships were getting bigger, so the models were scaled down to a 1:96 scale. Because obviously, once the super tankers started to come along, you were looking at models that were 10, 12 feet in length. And one, it was becoming impractical to sort of store them. And also the cost of having a model made was quite prohibitive as well. And then moving into the later 20th century, you're now getting these models made in foreign yards, using all sorts of materials, resins, plastics, hammered brass and metal sheets of current merchant ships that are going around the oceans now. This is a container ship, the Ever Royal of the 1990s. And we've got this really interesting model here of an LNG carrier, liquefied natural gas carrier, that was launched in the early 20th century. And we've had it sectioned so that you can see the construction of the tanks that hold the gas in its liquefied form, because obviously they've got to be kept under pressure, and it's got to be kept at a certain temperature as well. And we also commission models from time to time. This is a model of the Shulu, which we regard as the ultimate development of the sailing ship. It's four-masted, square-rigged. The hull is riveted construction, the steel masts and yards, with steel rigging as well. So it was built to last. And these ships operated well into the Second World War. And we commissioned this model again at 1:48 scale of the P&O passenger cruise liner, the Grand Princess, for our passengers gallery back in the 2000s. And you can see here the detail that was included in the model. This was made in the yard that built the actual ship in Italy, in Fincantieri. And then this is probably quite unique. We had a model of the Cacao, which was a distant fishing trawler that worked out of Hull in the Icelandic and Norwegian fishing fields, fishing grounds. And the actual ship, when it was named and launched on the Thames, the model was delivered to the museum as a gift by the actual ship. And that's one of our most modern models, probably a couple of years old, that one, again at a metric scale. And again, we think this is the largest ship model in a bottle in the world. It was one of the sculptures that was put on the plinths in Trafalgar Square by Yinka Schonibert, the artist. It shows the Victory in a large perspex bottle. I mean, this is huge. This is probably about 3 meters in length. And in terms of restoration, models, they do suffer over the years. This is a model that was rescued from the Imperial War Museum, which was bombed during the war with incendiaries and suffered water damage. And they came, this model came to us as a potential acquisition in terrible condition. And over a period of time, we had it dismantled. And then obviously you can see the state of the damage. It hadn't been touched since it was damaged from the war. And it's of a World War I hospital ship. That's a memory ball with all the parts taken off the model and put in the positions from which they came. And then you can see the restoration in progress here, and you can see the difference of having it cleaned and the parts cleaned and then reassembled. So that's the end of the stop share. That's the end of the slide presentation. What I'm going to show you now is my video presentation. I'll start this because this is, how are we doing for time, Alistair? Are we okay?
We're very good for time. Yeah,
okay,
you've got 15 minutes if you want.
Oh wow, okay, right. This will be quick then. Right, so this is an edited film of all the endoscopy work that I've done over the years. So this is going into an early model, and you can see it's like going on board the wreck of the Titanic. You've got all these hanging cobwebs inside the hull, because don't forget, this hasn't been touched since the model was made, you know, mid 18th century. This is quite an early film, so the actual quality isn't that good. And then you go up a deck and then you find this incredible detail again of the cooking hearth in the foredeck with its chimney going up onto the deck above. This is made of brass, and you can see the detail of the taps on the side and the ovens where you will put the bread in, that sort of thing. You've got the deck beams above, and then going up close to it. This is what you can do with an endoscope, because it's digital. You can zoom in, you can raise and lower the light levels. These are the bilge pumps that are either size of the main mast in midships. I've frozen it there so you get an idea of the top. So this would be like a rotating chain with leather buckets on. Now we're going into the hold of the model, and I believe this is the Bologna model I mentioned to you earlier about the one that's coppered. And when I was poking around inside, this note popped up, much to my amazement, bearing in mind it's upside down at the moment. So I had to come out from the model and then go back in to turn the endoscope around, so I could actually read the note and what it said. And the really interesting thing about this is that you'll notice when we go back, and you'll see the note the right way up, that the model dates from 1759, which was when the Bologna was launched. But the model is obviously shown at a later date with it coppered. So what they'd obviously done is got a model that was made in 1759 and blinged it up with all the copper sheathing and all the details on. And it says William Thompson, and then below that it's got Facet Chatham 1759, and then Thomas Burroughs, Thomas Burkitt. They were the two shipwrights who made the model. Now we've looked at their records in the naval records, and we know that they worked at Chatham from a certain time. We know how much they were paid and that sort of thing. So this is just below the gun deck in a compartment you can't get access to, and apart from through the mast aperture. So we were very lucky to find this note. It took me 25 years to find a note in one of our models. I'd found notes in other models around the world, but this was our first one. You'll notice here, this is a different model. We're going inside a frigate now, and there's a certain amount of hay and wood shavings. These models were transported in boxes with hay to protect them. And then you'll notice here is a series of cabins below the gun deck where they've actually annotated above, you know, this is the corporal of the Marines. And then alongside that, you've got the captain. You'll just come into view, and you can just see the bunk bed through the aperture there. And that left-hand side, you've got a doorknob on a hinged door. Do you see that? I'll just get my cursor so you can just come in through there. That's the bunk. There's the doorknob there, you see. And these doors are hinged. That's the bunk bed inside the doorway. And there's the Marines sign there. And just to the right of that, you've got the purser's cabin as well. There we are. There's the captain of the Marines, and there's the purser's cabin as well. And these run virtually down one side of the hull. And this is from a frigate of about 1790. Right down in the hull, along the keelson, I came across this printed cardboard coat of arms, which sadly we can't retrieve at the moment because one of the fittings that's coming up through the hull that secures it to a baseboard is holding that in place. But we were able to go in later on and have a good look at the armour, the coat of arms, to try and identify it. Now I'm going in through the stern of one of the ship models. This is the Victory of 1737, not Nelson's Victory, it was the previous one. And you'll notice here you've got the bulkheads of the cabin, the hinged doors, and you've got guns rigged on trucks, wooden trucks. Now, obviously, models of this age, they're quite grubby in places. You've got cobwebs hanging down, and you've got various growths and what have you on the woods. And we can't get into some of these models to actually clean them, not that we want to anyway. I mean, at some point in the future, we would like to take samples from these and do some tests as to what's in there and whether we can learn anything from the residue that's inside the model. But you can just see the detail that's inside these models. Some of this can be seen with the human eye, but a great deal is missed because it's just covered up by planking and decking. You've got brass turned guns on wooden carriages. And these bulkheads here, which have got windows and frames, and they're glass with overlaid wood on them. On some of the models, the upper planking of the deck has been omitted to throw light into the model. Just on the left-hand side, these red boxes, they're the bilge pumps. They're the covers that would cover the bilge pumps when they're being worked. So we're actually on the gun deck here now. We're going along the gun deck from the stern. You've got these wooden turned pillars that support the deck beams above us here. You've got a ladderway coming down from the upper gun deck. And then you've got a whole series of guns mounted on their carriages. And then looking forward, you've got the main riding bits, which is where the anchor cable was tied to when the ship was riding an anchor. And above us here, you've got the deck beam with the carlings and ledges that would construct below the deck planking. Double ladderway, there's the double capstan there. Gratings above that. And in some cases, you can actually see, you can work out the process of construction because you get glue runs and paint runs. So you can actually work out that this was then glued and then painted afterwards. And then the outside was painted after that because you've got brush marks coming in through the gun ports as well. So you learn a great deal about the actual process of construction. We've also put these models through CT scanners as well as X-ray machines. So we actually know how the models are constructed and what woods have been used and showing the grain and that sort of thing. And in some cases, the notes show up as well on a good CT scan. I'm just going to jump ahead on this one because there's a nice close-up there of a brass cannon mounted on a wooden truck. You can just see there in the background there, that was the anchor cable coming in through the hawse pipes at the bow. This is a different model, a different finish on a different gun deck, showing the cannons. There's capstan here on the left-hand side. Now we're going down into the actual, below the orlop deck. And this is the model I was telling you about earlier, where we found this cardboard figure. So this is the third rate of 1740. And it wasn't a straightforward down to the bottom. We had to go past this orlop deck here and then turn left. And you'll see coming into the picture in a minute, you'll see a pair of legs appear from a ball of dust. And this is Bernie hiding away in the hold of the ship, so to speak. There he is. And I was just scanning around and I thought, wait a minute, that looks like a human figure there. So I went back, had a closer look, and obviously his top half was obscured by a big ball of fluff and gunk. So I went back in again with a different tool that would remove the ball of fluff and what have you, the debris that had fallen into the model, so that I could see better the figure that was lying, on the hold in the bottom of the hull. I'll just move that on a bit. And you can see the figure's been exposed now. There's the head, there's the arm and the shoulders and the waist. Now, I had to come back out again and then put an attachment through the endoscope, which you can see here. This is the grabber that would be used in a medical sense. It would be used for taking biopsies inside the body, taking samples of human tissue for analysis or removing stuff. And this is quite a lethal bit of kit. It's quite sharp. So I had to be very careful about retrieving poor old Bernie without chopping him up, as it were. But I managed to sort of, and it took about 20 minutes to do this, to work out how I was going to pick up the figure. There's the figure there in the ground. You see the jaws have just opened. And the only way I could retrieve this was by grabbing him round the ankle, which is what I'm doing here, or trying. I think this is the final attempt of getting his ankle. Yeah, here we go. Obviously, because this is flat, I had to find a way of actually getting an edge underneath. There we are. And you can see I'm just pulling it up now. So bearing in mind, I've got to articulate the head of the endoscope as well as operate the medical grabber, so to speak. This is coming out through the main hatch and negotiating the orlop deck. And then at some point, you'll see my thumb coming in to grab it before it falls back into the model through the main hatch and coming up through the deck beams. So we're on the upper deck now, the upper gun deck. And this is a really nervous time for me because I'm thinking, there's my thumb coming in, and I managed to grab it against the wooden and we retrieved it. And obviously the photographs show there. Another use for this medical equipment is you can get in really close to show the detail and the construction and the sheer detail and quality of carving on these models. This is a model of a third rate, a Barfleur, 1768, showing the figurehead up close. Quite remarkable. This is about 4 centimeters in length or height, beautifully carved in boxwood and then varnished. And then you've got all the other details of the card decoration on the trail board here. There's the hawse pipes where the anchor cable would go in. There's a little frieze for you. And then the stern, you've got this lovely carved decoration of the taffrail, the quarter figures over the quarter galleries. And then going into the model itself, you've got these lovely, whoops, what's happening here? Let's get rid of that. I don't want that square in the way. What's going on? How do I get rid of this square? Ah, seriously? Obviously something that's happened here, so my apologies. Oh, there we go. Right, sorry about that. You've got a parquetry laid floor. These are the deck beams from the deck above. You've got these lovely panelled bulkheads, gun ports here. You've got a diamond parquetry laid floor here. I'm walking in through the stern now, through the grand cabin into the next set of cabins. You can just see the wheel up on the deck above. So I'm moving this on a bit because there we are. That's the door where that came in from the other side. You can see the glass on the inside of the frames. So this is the view you would get from inside the model looking out over the stern gallery. Again, going into the model, there's the bilge pumps that we saw earlier with their covers on and their cisterns. That goes all the way down either side of the mainmast, right the way down to the bilges either side of the keelson where the mast would be stepped. And some of these parts of these models haven't been varnished because they haven't been able to get to them. So you actually see the natural wood in its natural state, showing the grain. In some cases, we've been able to identify the type of woods used as a result of that. That's the double capstan. You've got these beautifully carved balustrades out of bone with bone pillars as well, supporting the deck beams above. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. Some of this you can't see, some of it you can. Coming in through a gun port, there's another view of the stairway coming down from the main deck into the middle gun deck. Now I'm going into another a smaller model of a yacht. This is the, if you like, the company car for the commissioners of the dockyard. This is the Chatham Yacht, 1740. You've got a lovely parquet floor. And what we didn't know until we went in with the endoscope was that the walls have been painted blue and then decorated with like a wallpaper, which is quite extraordinary. So you've actually got 18th century internal decoration of a vessel which hasn't been affected by light. So that's actually quite a true colour. So we could at some point take a sample from that and actually get an 18th century colour match as well. And you can see the decoration on there. Going through into the next cabin, you've got this beautiful compass rose on the floor, and this is at the stern. So this is the casing that would cover the top of the tiller and the rudder. And that's a top view. And you can just see the decoration of the cabin, of the wallpaper. So this was basically this sort of, you know, the company car for the commissioners. And in the next cabin, you've got the meeting room where they would sit around the in midships if the weather was inclement. I'm just going through there now, through the door. And there you are, that's their sort of boardroom, so to speak. You've got side benches either side, and there'll probably be a table in the middle. This is where they would eat and discuss various and have meetings and that sort of thing. And then depending upon the length of the journey, I'm going up into the forward end of the yacht now. And this is where the sleeping accommodation was. You've got these lovely little bunk beds with sliding doors, complete with actual materials for the bedding. And then you've got the 4-pit cabin here. There we are. There's the material for the bunk beds. Obviously, it's overscale, but you know, you can't have everything. So this is quite amazing. I mean, we hadn't looked at every single model that's probably got this sort of detailing. So there's more work to be done for this. And I've only had the equipment a year, and then COVID struck, so we haven't been able to get back to the stores to work on it really. There's the fire hearth to keep them warm in the cabin. Quite basic. Now I'm going back down through the mast aperture back to that model that has that lovely cardboard coat of arms, which has got some writing on it as well, which you can see here in the foreground. We will go back into this at some point and clear away all the debris, the wood shavings, and hopefully get a better photograph and try and read what this signature says. It's either from the maker or it's the name of the owner of the model. We just don't know at this stage. And the Royal College of Arms. I mean, I've got hours of this sort of material. There's a double wheel there, made in bone, that I could show you. This would be another talk in itself, this presentation of all the endoscopy work that I've done. And I know that colleagues in similar situations have done this as well. This is a model that's always been quite heavy to hold, and I've always wondered why. When I went inside the lower hull, it was actually ballasted with 2 ingots of lead. So clearly at some point, this model was made to float in water. So there's one of the lead ingots there, secured to the bottom of the hull. So they're obviously doing trials in terms of trimming the hull as to see how it would sit in the water. And that is the end of the presentation. And that's Bernie, my good friend Bernie.
Simon, that's brilliant. Bernie surely was the master carpenter, wasn't he? He just left his mark in the ship.
Well, one would hope so. I mean, he's wearing the uniform of a shipwright. You know, he's got the typical cap of a shipwright on. So
absolutely right.
Yeah.
Well, maybe someone in the Society of Model Shipwrights can recognise him. Thank you so much for coming back, and we look forward to the third one as well. That was a brilliant lecture. I know there are a lot of questions out there, 20 so far.
Oh, great.
And it's wonderful, the fact that we have had 319 people at the peak listening to you.
Wow.
Not many have left, and I think that's a sign of how interested you've kept us all through that wonderful presentation. I just cannot get over, having seen it at the rehearsal and seeing it again now, the interior of the ship. What a privilege.
Oh, it's incredible.
Who else has ever seen the inside of rated man of war?
No, I'm
whatever
the ship may do that. Absolutely. And it's a great privilege.
It's quite extraordinary.
It's like opening a time capsule. It really is.
Exactly. Just a shame you haven't found the brass monkeys yet, but that no doubt will come. Thank you so much. I've got one quick question on the way, and that is, well, I would ask you about what your involvement with Gloriana was. Maybe you want to give me a word on that.
Yeah. Yes.
But also, how did you get involved with endoscopy?
Yes, it's an interesting story. When I for many years, I gave lectures in our lecture at the museum about the ship model collection, obviously. And I would bring in models to show members of the audience in the flesh under supervision. They could actually look at them close up. And one of the audience members was a radiographer, a good friend of mine, Roger Hicks. And he came up to me at the end, he said, have you ever used an endoscope to look inside these models? And because I'd used a rigid boroscope, which is like an industrial scope for going inside of engines, and we used it to go inside the poles of a globe, because that was the only way in through a globe, a terrestrial globe, was to go in through the poles. And I'd gone inside using that, but it was very, very clumsy. And obviously, you know, you haven't got the maneuverability of a flexible endoscope, and also the quality as well. And he said, oh, I've got an endoscope if you want to borrow it, and we'll have a look at some models. And, you know, that's where it started. And it's led me to a number of contacts in the medical world who have loaned me state-of-the-art digital endoscopes, you know, where we can film, we can freeze frame all digitally, and we can enlarge, reduce, we can adjust the light levels, and we can also use these amazing tools that you can send down the endoscope for moving stuff, retrieving stuff, that sort of thing. So that's how it started, really.
That's fantastic. Is there a vacuum? Well, perhaps that's too dangerous.
There is a vacuum, yes. You can puff, you can blow, you can suck, you can even squirt water, which I'm not going to do. But yes, there's the whole range of theories. You've got these balloons that will actually expand and collect stuff as well.
Sure.
So it's like performing surgery on ship models in the 18th century.
Just a quick word before I hand you to Jenny for the questions on your involvement with the Gloriana.
Yes, I got involved through our chairman of trustees, Lord Stirling at the time, who was the patron for the building of the Gloriana. And they were coming up a series of questions, historical questions about the construction, the layout, the uses. And I was sent to go and do some research about the internal fit out of the barge, in particular the toilet and that sort of thing, if there was one fitted. And I went and did a lot of research at the Guildhall Library, where a lot of the archives are kept for the livery companies. And obviously the Gloriana barge itself is a larger version of the barges that were made and used by the livery companies when they processioned on the Thames in the 17th and the 18th century. So that's how I got involved with that. And it was a fascinating project to be involved with. Obviously the Queen launched it at Greenwich, which was fantastic. And then it's been rowed up and down the Thames on all sorts of occasions.
And it's kept upriver, I think, is that right?
That's right, upriver to Richmond and downriver as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Right, Jenny, over to you. You've got your work cut out. Jenny, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Good.
You could say I've got my work cut out, but I'm going to try and join some of the questions together. So forgive me for the delay in this. I've got a very similar question from David Mann, from Don Westerheiden. Gosh, they're coming in thick and fast now. Ronald Wilkinson, Morton Stoll, Ron Nielsen.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Colour, Tim Frost. So all of them would like to know why the beautiful interiors were actually made for the models. The stuff that we've seen through the endoscope, just brilliant. Was it pride in their workmanship, or was it a requirement of whoever commissioned the model? Why was it, Simon?
Well, if I knew the answer, it'd be fantastic. I mean, I've got some ideas. I mean, clearly there are features and fittings inside models that would not be accessible or seen by the human eye. There's no question of that. And one theory was that they were built in stages for discussion, but I don't believe that. These models are too intricate. They would have taken too long to build. They would have cost too much money. They weren't a working model, and these were built for high-end clients, you know, individuals that were associated with the Navy, the wealthy, you know, senior officers, that sort of thing. And I still feel that it was probably pride of work. I know model makers today that I've spoken to, and they put things inside models that they know aren't going to be seen until the model is broken up or damaged in some form. And this was probably the case in that respect. That's all I can say, because the sort of features inside these models, they wouldn't be discussing at Navy Board. You know, they know what a capstan looks like, what it does. So why put a capstan in? There's no need for it. I think it was the pride of the model makers themselves. And bearing in mind, these models were probably made by a group of individuals with different crafts and skill sets. One would be a turner, a carver, a metal worker, a shipwright, that sort of thing. One would paint, decorative material, that sort of thing. So, you know, it must have been a source of pride. I mean, in particular, if it was for a commission for a very important person or even royalty, it's got to be the best. It's got to be interesting. And you just never know. I mean, the other theory is that they started building the model with the idea that the decks would be open so that you could actually see down inside the model to see these features. And then for some reason, it was decked over and covered up. And I know model makers in recent years where they've actually started on that, and they've suddenly realized that without cutting holes in things, they're not going to see the work that they've put in the model beforehand. So you've got to work your way back when you make a model of this sort of detail and quality about what you want to show and what you're trying to achieve, you know, and the challenges as well. That's the other thing. Model makers love a challenge.
Well, they
I hope
certainly.
that's answered the question. I mean, that's a very common question I get asked when I do this sort of talk.
Thank you. And I've got a similar question from Jeffrey Renshaw and Ron Nielsen again. What glues were used on the early models?
Yes, I mean, we've done some tests on glues, and we know for sure that animal glues were used as well as fish glues. We've done some, actual tests, and these joints were backed up with wooden pins or tree nails in the full scale sense of it, and also brass nails just to hold them in place. But over time, as you might well imagine, these glues do fail. They become very brittle. But certainly we know fish glue and also animal glue, like glue made from hoofs and that sort of thing, was definitely used.
Thank you very much. And then were models ever used at shipyards in lieu of plans, or is this a myth?
Sorry, were ever models
used at shipyards instead of plans, or is this a myth?
In some cases, yes. I mean, I showed you an example of that very basic model in frame with planks on of a barge, and they were produced in the smaller yards around the coast. But the yards that built things like sailing trawlers and drifters and small craft yachts, that sort of thing, where they didn't have the facilities or the manpower to actually build these lovely intricate models. And also the owner probably didn't want one. I mean, he probably wanted a trawler similar to that one over there that they built, but he probably wanted it slightly longer and slightly wider in the beam. So the shipwright would knock up this fairly basic half model with bulkheads and ribbons or planks on to do that. So it's unlikely really that these models were. And don't forget, at this time in the 19th century, there were a number of professional model makers like Alan Hunt who were around, who would make really highly detailed, accurate scale models for high-end clients.
Thank you. That question was from David Latane. An anonymous attendee has asked, what impact do you feel 3D computer graphics have had on miniature ship models? Has it helped in ways, or has it generally diminished interest in models?
I'm pleased to say, actually, because I thought exactly the same when CAD, which is computer-aided design, came along. I thought, well, this is the death knell for ship models, but no, far from it. They are still making models for presentational reasons. They are still using them for testing, in tank testing. They're still towing models in water to work out the physical characteristics of a hull and how it performs in water under load and at speed. So no, I would say that they're not being built in such quantities anymore, but they are certainly still considered. Certainly in the maritime field, not so much the warship side, but certainly in the maritime field, models are still being produced for the clients by the shipyards as part of the purchase or as a gift to the owners. And the owners will use them as publicity, and so will the dockyards and the shipyards. So yes, I mean, the models are still being built, but not in such large quantities anymore. And also at a more smaller and metric scale, because they're more user-friendly and cost-effective.
Thank you very much. Anthony Cluder would like to know, or Clouder, I beg your pardon, do you have collections of the tools and techniques used by the model makers through the ages?
We've got some 18th century, late 18th century tools, miniature tools like little box planes, that sort of thing. We've also found inside some of the models broken drill bits where they've snapped off inside the model and fallen through, and obviously they can't retrieve them. So yes, we have to a certain extent, but not a lot. You can see when you go inside some of the 18th century models where they've made in bread and butter construction, glued together and then gouged out internally. You can actually see that they've used curved gouges, which is like a curved chisel. So you can actually work out the sort of tools that were used. And band saws, there are still marks on some of the timbers that have been used that show the cut and the teeth. You can see where a timber has been filed or sandpapered as well. So we can actually pretty much know what tools were used. And also, certainly in the 18th century, the art of cabinet making and carpentry was very well known. And there are various directories of tools and methodology and materials that were used. And they've generally followed the craft of cabinetry and carpentry in making these models as well.
Okay, thank you. Captain Stephen Taylor, who's chair of the Friends of the Wellington. Do you have any evidence of models being used to progress the design of a hull to examine the seaworthiness of the vessels?
Yes, we do, which what we would call tow tank models. Yes, we've got a number of those in the collection. I couldn't quite squeeze them in, unfortunately, but yes, we've got a number of tow tank models of yachts, motor yachts, and we've got some early tow tank models of destroyers that were being developed by Thornycroft down in Southampton, as well as planing fast attack crafts where they've got a step chine under the hull, so the hull would go at speed and lift up out of the water, which would reduce the friction or drag of a hull. So yes, we've got models in the collection that show the design and development of the hull form, so to speak.
Thank you very much. Howard Mackenzie Wilson, not sure in which diary year, but Pepys mentions sending models of a double capstan for a third-rate round to all the naval dockyards as a means of standardizing such fittings for the Navy. Does the collection have an example? I'm aware of such a model here in Sussex in a private collection, and I'd love to compare it with the National Maritime Museum model, if one exists, in order to establish if it is indeed one of those original models.
Wow, that's very interesting, because we do have models of capstans that were made to show the standard form of capstan. 18th century though, really, we think, because the shape and design of a capstan in the 17th century was different to an 18th century capstan. So I'd be very interested to hear from that gentleman.
Yes,
as to what he's got.
May well be, if I can interrupt, that Howard, and he has done this in the past, has been on the wash up after the
oh, okay, brilliant.
Evening.
I've got pen and paper at the ready then, Howard.
Sorry to interrupt.
I'd be fascinated, no, because the unfortunate thing about Pepys and his model collection is that we don't really know what happened to it in the longer term. We know that it was left to his friend in his will, but we don't know what happened to it after then, which was a great shame. We can surmise the surviving models that are from that period that may have been involved with Pepys, but we can't say for certain, hand on heart, that they were actually owned by Samuel Pepys.
Yeah,
but no, I mean, I'd love to see a model of a capstan from the 17th century. We've got examples of 17th century capstans inside some of our 17th century models, so that would be a very interesting comparison. And straight away, I could probably tell whether it is a 17th century capstan model he has or an 18th century.
Yeah. Okay, we'll make sure we put the two of you in touch.
Oh, fantastic.
You have a great fan in a gentleman called Michael Benefield.
Oh, right.
who sent in several questions, but the one I'm going to choose, he's interested in historical lead fittings and the issues that might occur after using lead.
Yes, lead is a problem. Has been for hundreds of years because of the purity. The purer the lead, the more stable it is. The more impure, the more unstable it becomes, because it does what we call implode. So it corrodes from within. And if you mix in temperature with that moisture and salts, it starts to fall apart. And then if you put paint and that sort of thing on top of it, that reacts against it as well. So lead is an unstable. It's unstable in many ways. So you tend to find the use of lead on sailor-made models because it was an easily available material and quite malleable. So you could actually shape it and cut it, and they would use it for things like the blocks in the rigging. They would use it for the wheels, you know, the steering wheels at the stern. And the anchors was another common thing that was made out of lead. And over the years, on some of our models and other models I've seen all over the place, you get these fittings just turning into white powder, and it is a real problem. Depending upon how badly corroded it is, you can actually strip them down and save them, but there's no real answer to that one, unfortunately.
Thank you very much. I'm going to wind this up because there are 52 questions on here and we can't possibly ask them all, but I will grab them and see if we can get some of you who haven't had your questions answered, if we can get you some answers from.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that post talk. That's not a problem.
Meanwhile, Gary Brown says greetings from Kona, Hawaii.
Oh, fantastic.
And I'm trying to scroll down. Here we go. Kevin Kenny says, thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin.
and says, greetings from Trinidad and Tobago.
Oh, wow.
So we do have a global audience on here.
Fantastic.
But I'll call that a day, and perhaps we can go back to the presentation, Fiona. Okay, we're going to give you a little briefing on our next lecture, A Mariner's View of Selected Scottish Lighthouses by Captain Simon Quayle. He's a master mariner, member of the Honourable Company, and he's one of our newest Wellington Trust ambassadors. We'll of course send you all details of this, and we hope you can enjoy it. You can join us and enjoy it again. And if you have enjoyed this lecture, here's a heartfelt plea from me. We cannot run the Wellington Trust and do all the good educational work and preservation work of the ship without support from you, our adoring public, if I may say so. So if you wouldn't mind and are able to do it, please do make a donation to us. And lots of you who already have, so thank you very much for that.
Therefore, only remains to me to say once again, Simon, thank you so much. It is quite fascinating. Speaking from a personal point of view, I did a number of years in the Royal Navy, a very few, but my last job was in the Admiralty, and I used to spend a lot of time down in the library in Whitehall, looking at books on ships' models. And at that time, which was many years ago, I thought, I want to learn to make models. I'd like to think it's never too late to start doing anything. Maybe one day I will make my own. I make them in paper and cardboard at the moment with my granddaughter. But it's been a wonderful lecture. I've learned so much. What is amazing as much as anything, is apart from taking us through the inside of a man of war, which rarely will one get the treat to have, you took us over such a span of years. Yeah. Quite extraordinary. Quite extraordinary. Thank you so much. Pleasure. Look, this is coming. Great. This is coming to the end of the formal part of the evening. For those who wish to stay on, we will stay a little longer because it's been so interesting. I've wanted Simon to go on, and indeed he has, rather longer than perhaps we would normally, but it's just been so intriguing. But do stay over if you wish. Now, the routine here is our absolute IT guru, Matt Edgar, will be bringing you into what I always call the wash-up, or the after discussion. Do come and stay if you wish, wherever you are in the world, I can say, because it's wonderful to see international representation, people coming into that could talk, but also there's always something to learn of great interest. So with that, my thanks to everybody, and indeed for the home team for organizing it, Matt and Jenny and Fiona, and Simon, lastly again to you, thank you so much for this evening, and for the others, look forward to seeing you and maybe hearing you next month. Goodbye. Here we are.
Wow. I'm just seeing
just like that
popping up.
Just like that.
Natalie Jacobs, yes.
Fantastic. I think we got some good names. Good news. Andy Owler. Do you want to, if you want, take yourself off mute. It's always good, even if you're sitting there with your mute off and saying nothing, it doesn't matter. It's just great to be able to talk to you across. There.
Oh wow, here we go.
Angela again. How nice to see you again.
Hey, look at this.
Good evening, thank you. Model maker from many years ago, I always had motorized models, electric typically.
Yeah.
Do you have electric or indeed steam models? In
we do. Exhibition? Yeah, I mean, we not only do we have models that represent vessels in throughout maritime history. I'm also very keen on model making styles and different types of model. So we've got sailor-made models. One model I haven't got at the moment is a model in matchsticks. But I've got working models in the collection. We've got a working pair of submarine models, a German one and an English one. We've got clockwork models, as I said earlier in the show. We've got toys that were played with by children. We've got the 1 to 1200 scale waterline models. We've got radio controlled models as well. Yes, so yeah, we do have working models in the collection because it covers the craft of model making as well as illustrating the design and development of ships throughout time. So I'm very keen on that.
Thank you very much.
Fascinating.
Pleasure.
Gosh, all these new names. Welcome.
I
And how do you do for those who haven't been on before?
I just see
Bruce, are you? I think you're a first timer, aren't you, Bruce?
I am. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me.
Well, that's great. Where are you resident at the moment?
Sussex.
Sussex.
Lovely.
Fantastic.
Yes, just a frisbee throw away. Not like Kevin, somebody I communicate with occasionally who is in Trinidad and Tobago.
Wow.
I'm much closer to home and feeling very sorry that I can't get up to Chatham.
Yeah. Well, it's, I mean, what I didn't say during the talk, because I ran out of time, was that we do organise tours around our model store at Chatham. We encourage it, and they have to be by appointment only. And I suggested to Jenny and Fiona that members of the Wellington Trust, we can organise a visit when things get a bit back to normal, whatever that is. So
Sure.
watch this
What, a
space.
group visit?
A group visit.
Yeah, but I think we might do it as a sort of friends.
Friends.
Visit,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yes.
And perhaps we're all in other parts of the dockyard as well.
Oh, well,
I'm sure it will be gratefully
more than a day out.
received.
Absolutely. More
That'd be
than a day
great.
out.
Well, Bruce, we'll make sure you know about that anyway.
Very kind of you. Thank you.
Forgive me asking, but are you a friend, or do you get notifications, that sort of thing? Otherwise, you can find them online.
I'm one of the crashers from the Nautical Research Guild and the Society of Model Shipwrights.
Oh,
Brilliant.
fantastic.
Ah.
Thanks for your support.
Fantastic. Crash away. But not literally. Well,
I do have a question, if it is an
Yeah, no,
appropriate moment.
far away.
I was just wondering, Simon, many thanks for what you've done, and I'm deeply envious of your career. But one of the things that I have been mulling over for a while concerns small boats,
Yes.
the ship's boats. I know there was an order given in the late 18th century, and then it evolved through the 19th century, to have provisions for all the boats on a ship, including many of the contract ships, to be able to be armed.
Okay.
And it seems to have been down to the ship's carpenter, because there was no standardization given, no set of blueprints as the time would have had, whatever they looked like.
Yeah.
Have you come across anything in the models that you have been handling that indicates that there was some standardization of the fittings?
We've got plans, and we've also got the build specifications for the small craft, as we call them, the ship's boats, end of the 19th century into the 20th century. What I haven't seen are specific references to them being dual purposed, as in multi-armed. So that's actually quite interesting. I mean, a lot of what we call the service boats, the boats that would be used by naval ships, are clearly dual purpose as well. But you're saying in the merchant service as well, or just the Royal Naval side of things? Or?
Well, the way I read the order, which I found in the National Archives at Kew,
right.
The way I read the order was that it was ships in service as opposed to English Navy ships. But of course, there were all the sort of the white vans of the day, were all the transports that were hired in.
Yeah.
And in many cases, they were virtually naval ships, even though the profits went to somebody else who was quite often a Royal Navy officer as well.
Yeah.
There was no real break between the merchant service in many cases if they were on convoy duty and the naval officers and the naval ships surrounding them. So I see the drawings showing how the cannons, carronades, etc., are going to be fitted so that they can be dropped down for stability, etc. But I then don't see any evidence when I'm looking at the old ship models of a type of fitting being incorporated, since it's supposed to have covered all the boats. I would expect to see the common feature in all the boats. It's not there, or I'm not recognizing it.
Would there have been 9-pounders, Bruce, sort of bow chasers as such, or what?
No, those could be fitted into a hole in the side of the boat, just something that you might poke the stalk on the bottom in. Now, these were sliding carronade carriages and cannon carriages, which would be up to 12 pounds, or I think on some of the longer launches, you could actually get an 18-pounder on, but that I wouldn't want to be on that when it was
fairly
fired.
hefty launches for that. Yeah. I mean, we do have models that show that where the gun carriage will go into a midships. I mean, these are armed gunboats that were sailed and rowed, and it would be on a sliding carriage, but they were quite small, 6-pounders, that sort of thing. And they would drop down in lower into the hull as well to give it stability. But I mean, it's quite uncommon. I wouldn't say they were, quite. What's going on here?
We're going to see the webinar again.
That is.
We're going to have a wild
I'd
ride
love
here.
to.
Yes, accepting everything that you've said and not wishing to drag this out and take time away from somebody else. What I'm referring to is having found an order that all boats would be fitted in such a manner or made capable of taking these boats. I then don't see the evidence in the boats.
I'd like to see a copy of that order. Have you got a copy of it? I
can send you something.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd like to see that, actually. I mean, Fee has got my email address, so get in touch, and I'd be very interested to know about that, because there was a book published by Commander May, a former colleague of mine at the museum, which I updated some years ago. Yeah, I updated. I added all my material to it, so there's no point me quoting that. But no, I'd be very interested to see the order first of all, just to see what they're aiming at, and then by looking at that, I think, oh, I know what it. Yeah, I get it now. So I can, and because every time someone flags something like that, like this, up to me, it makes me look at a different part of the model in a different way. And it's been, I've been staring at a model for 20 odd years, and I've never noticed that feature until a model maker or researcher has come along and said, well, hold on, how does it do this? Then you go back and look at it and think, God, it's there in front of me, and I just never picked it up. So it's
fascinating. There we are.
Did I understand that I'll get an email or something from, is it Fiona Sparks there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Fiona.
She's next to you on the screen, so she's heard everything you said, Bruce. There we are. Holly.
Hi, Alistair. How are you, darling?
I'm very well indeed. You're learning an awful lot through this series of lectures, aren't you?
Oh my! And Simon, I want to thank you for the presentation and tell you I just always love the old wooden vessels. Yeah. They're like artwork. It's like art, And then you look at the evergreen, and I'm like, what happened?
I know. Well, yeah. I mean, they're just boxes, aren't they? But yeah. I mean,
Holly is in Michigan or Lake Michigan. I think you're.
No, I'm in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Southeast Wisconsin. And what Alstar is trying to say, what he means to say is, my apartment windows face Lake Michigan.
Bruce,
I am a sucker
Ian
for
McLaughlin
water.
Speaking. Oh, I'm trying to get onto this thing, but I can't.
I'm just going to mute things.
Simon?
Right. Now, wait one, Ian, will you? Matt, did you pick that message up that Ian's trying to get on? Anything you can do to help?
I did, yes. I'm sort of still going through the list and trying to promote everyone to panelist. And if they're still sitting,
I think they know that I'm trying to get on.
Yeah. So
I can see you, Ian. You're there.
Ian, you are actually on, and I can. So far away.
I can't actually see myself on it, but that's probably a good thing.
No, I can't see you either, but it's.
You can hear me. That's the main thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Sorry, what happened to Holly? First of all,
I'm here. Sorry, I don't know if Simon did. I don't know if Simon, if you were able to hear me or not.
I can hear you.
Yeah, Ian, we'll come back to you in a minute.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Go on, Holly.
Okay.
Yeah, Holly, you carry on.
Oh, I'm here. I live in Southeast Wisconsin in Kenosha, and my apartment windows face Lake Michigan because I am a sucker for water and the boats.
Yeah, lovely. Gosh.
And I would like to tell you one more thing, Simon. I hope to see you again on your 45th anniversary next year webinar.
Well, I've got no plans of going anywhere, and I fully intend to be there next year. So absolutely, I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
Fantastic. Great to hear from you, Holly. Ian, let me come back to you.
Thank you very much, Alistair. We had a discussion on Friday night. That was the Society of Model Shipwrights and our friends in Canada and the USA. And one of the talks that was given by Alistair Roach, who is the secretary.
Oh, yes. I know Alistair. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay. He gave it on ship models, their use, and in World War I and after.
Yes.
The important thing was, in the discussion afterwards, we had a very long debate about the sad fact that the models available to the general public are very limited now.
Yeah.
One particular example was the Science Museum, where they've withdrawn all their models from the top floor of the building. But what a point.
Sorry, can you repeat that again, Ian? Can you repeat that last sentence again, because that died?
Yeah, that one of the examples about the removal of models from public view was given as a Science Museum.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Now, one of our members is a chap called Paul Fauntleroy,
Yes.
who lives in New Mexico.
I know Paul. Yeah.
And he pointed out that the trouble is that we display models without adequate context surrounding them.
Right.
Now, we are all great model enthusiasts. The general public are not, and they need to be able to see a model and actually see what it achieved, perhaps how it was built. We need to do something about this if we're going to get the ship model back as an important player in the business of educating our young people about our history.
Yeah.
For example,
Got the answer.
if we had a, shall we say, a display on the Battle of the Atlantic at some suitable place, we could get in models of the Bismarck, the Hood, the cruiser, which I think was Devonshire. We could get in the carriers, model of the aircraft. And that would actually allow us to display models in a context, and that could be organized all over the country. This is an educational matter for people who are not necessarily ship model makers.
Right.
It needs some serious consideration, I think.
Is the issue therefore storage of these these pieces, or is it transportation, or is it finding places and people who will receive them to field these exhibitions?
The issue is a serious logistic one in order that you set it up. But if we regard the model ship as a really important item in displaying our history, then we need to look at a new way of exhibiting it so it really attracts the general public.
That is fascinating.
No, I agree. I mean, this is an age-old question, stroke argument that's been going on now. I mean, when I joined the museum in the late 70s, the traditional Maritime Museum was still in existence. You had galleries full of models, paintings, objects, that sort of thing, in the traditional way. And then over a period of time, the sort of the style of display and interpretation changed. You've got the arrival of digital and video format as well, where a lot of the designers and the museum designers tended to go in that route. They were going for images of objects rather than the actual objects themselves. The Achilles heel of ship models, and I've always said this, has been the size and the size of the display case that you need to exhibit models in. One, they cost a lot of money, you know, a proper museum exhibit display case, and two, it actually increases the footprint of the model quite considerably. So you've got practical problems there. But yes, I mean, there are ways of using models for interpretation, probably not on the scale that we used to have back in the 70s and before then, because the audience expects more now. It's a much greater range of audience with different interpretation, you know, all ages, all sexes, genders, everything. And the current thinking is that in museums is that the object has got to tell a story. They want to get across a story to the member of the public, a personal story, a human story, whatever. So, you know, the days of having the standard traditional style of a gallery with a narrative which is chronological, historical within reason, is changing, although it's actually going back full circle, because, you know, there are plans afoot to do some of these galleries. So it's really down to the individual institutions, really, and also the holdings they have. That's the other thing. Not every museum. We're very lucky at Greenwich in that we've got this amazing from around the world, from the earliest times through to the present, where we've got that broad range of collection where we could probably do something like that. But at the moment, we don't have the space, so to speak. Oops, your internet connection is unstable. Is that me or is that you guys?
You've got a challenge there, Solmaz, along with Jenny. I think from Ian, it's a very fascinating subject. One thing I was going to say, Simon, is, or to ask is there a kind of demographic measurement that could be looked at of those who come through through Greenwich in terms of age and how they react to these models?
Yeah, we do that almost, I wouldn't say on a monthly basis, but because of our ticket sales, and we've got people in the galleries themselves, we monitor our visitors very, very closely. For obvious reasons, in terms of the sort of audiences we should be aiming at. We have school parties, the merchandise that we're selling in our shops, the books that we're selling, that sort of thing. We're very, very aware of our audience and also the current trends. The other thing one has to bear in mind is that you get edicts from above, from the government, about education. This is the curriculum that they're teaching in schools now. So we then have to, in terms of funding, we have to push, have to tick all these boxes for school, things like school children, gender equality, all of these different boxes have to be addressed for us to maintain our core funding from the government, as well as generating our own as well. So it's a very difficult balance to achieve. You've got to, you're trying to, appease everyone when in fact it's not always possible. But the great thing about this subject is it goes round in circles. I've seen so many circles since I've been at the museum over a long career, where we were talking about this some years ago, and it's gone full circle and it's come up again. So it's something that will be addressed. I mean, the one thing that we do have to our advantage is that we've now got our collections online, so they are available worldwide digitally. Obviously, people like seeing the objects in the flesh in the galleries, which I've always been a strong supporter of. But yes, it's a tricky one. That one, it is very tricky.
It's fascinating.
And Simon, I would absolutely agree with that, because our educational programs on board, which we run from kids in primary schools right up through to sixth form college. We've got such a lot of models on the HQS Wellington that belong to the Honourable Company of Master Mariners, but trying to bring them into the educational programs and the curriculum that we have to deal with is very, very hard.
Yes. But
I would say to everyone that we have now photographed all the models in the HCMM collection. Simon, I should share that with you, shouldn't I? And we do plan to have, when we have tours around the ship, we do plan to have information on each ship, each model, to talk to our visitors about. So that's an operation in planning.
Absolutely. How to do it. I'm going to hop back. Ron Nielsen, your backdrop or your photo behind is of a double helm by the looks of it. What can you say about her?
I can say that I believe it's from the Constitution. It's a photo I retrieved online of the USS Constitution.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and I have a whole gallery that I love to alternate during Zoom meetings.
Keep people guessing. I think that's fantastic.
For example, I used to be with the Connecticut Marine Model Society. It's a shipbuilding group on the East Coast of America.
Nice.
Here's a picture of a model I built of the HMS Ardent.
Wow.
And then here's one of a ship in the Caribbean. I do model making. I put my ships into dioramas.
Oh, that's fantastic.
That's my speciality.
Beautiful.
Absolutely brilliant. How long, Ron? Let's take that model behind you now.
Yes.
How long would it take you to build that? Or is it a silly question because you start and stop?
Not a silly question at all. Personally, I don't like to take more than a year to build a model. I do specialize in English models. That's what I have chosen to do. I started building in 2010. And so I typically like to hold my work to around 8 to 10 months. I have gone a little longer on a fully rigged model, like the one I showed you briefly. The Ardent is fully rigged, and that took a little over a year. But I love to do rigging, which is certainly one of the big challenges of doing, the age of sail ships of the 18th century.
Now that one behind you now, Ron.
Yes.
We've got the ensign, of course, and we've got the tricolor. Is that right?
The tricolor, yes, because that was pointed out to me on Model Ship World, a forum that the Nautical Research Guild runs, that ensign was incorrect on the Ardent. The Ardent was captured by the French in the Battle of the Saints, which is essentially the Virgin Islands today. And in the Battle of the Saints, this ship, which is a third rate, 64 gun, was captured by the French. It was recaptured by the English. I forget the captain, but what at the time, it actually had two flags on the ensign, and the British flag of war was flown above the French flag, which it turned out was not, in fact, the tricolor. It was the Bourbon flag. And that was pointed out to me by a person in Model Ship World, said, hey, wait a minute, that's not the correct flag for the French. So indeed, I looked it up, and it was the Bourbon flag, which of course is the fleur de lis in a pattern, gold pattern. And so I've since replaced it from this photo.
That's interesting. Well, I'm very proud of having spotted that one.
Good spotting. Yeah.
Stephen, good evening.
Thank you.
I'm sorry you're suffering. So I hear you and Dinah are not. You're going through the dreaded. Is that right?
We've both gone and picked up this ruddy COVID.
Oh, bad luck.
So, because one thing I was going to say, what I've been hearing is absolute manna from heaven from everybody assembled tonight on how important models are for education.
Oh gosh,
and it's one of the key issues. It's so good to see so many people who are not regular members of the Heritage Evenings, and for all those, one of our key roles in the trust is to educate the nation, this nation, UK, in the importance of the Merchant Navy and our maritime history. And it's fascinating when we do have schools coming along and where we have exhibitions, the amount of time that some of the kids actually spend just looking at a model. And this whole concept of bringing the models alive that's been discussed tonight, it's just wonderful if we can take that forward. I just would like to say briefly, Elsa, tomorrow is the memorial service, I think, for David Agate.
I will be speaking at it.
I gather so, because now, unfortunately, I won't be able to be there.
No, well, I will carry your respects for Joan.
Do please, because there are a number of models on board this ship that do just that, bringing the sea and what the sea is all about alive.
Very quickly, for those 71 who are here, of those who don't know, David Agate,
thank you,
who was a metropolitan policeman and a model maker. Indeed, I wonder if he was a member of the Society of Model Shipwrights. I suspect he might have been. Someone here might confirm. David Agate, who died a year ago, was a fantastic model maker. I met him when he came into the wardroom. I happened to be there, and there were just the two of us in there, and he came in with a ship in a bottle, a small one, which he had made for his wife. Yeah, and it now sits in the wardroom in the ship. But Agate was a wonderful model maker, and it's his memorial service tomorrow. Yeah.
He was not a member of our society, to my knowledge, but I will have a look.
That's interesting. Ian, I don't know if you know the church in the city, St. Magnus the Martyr, where the service happens to be tomorrow, is very close to London Bridge. And there's a model of the old London Bridge that David built some years ago. And the game, and I'm going to do it tomorrow because I've never had the opportunity, is to look for the Metropolitan policeman who's standing on the bridge amongst the miniature crowd. And that will be him. It's his self-portrait. It's rather like, what's his name? Simon, the chap who was lying in the model.
Oh, Bernie.
Bernie, that's right. Bernie. He's the kind of Bernie of London Bridge.
Oh, bless him.
Anyway, this is such a fertile conversation. I always love these wash-ups afterwards. They're fantastic. My cousin, my dear beloved cousin there, Ewan Lawrence, is there. Are you still on, Ewan, or have you gone? Yeah, I think you are there still. Yeah. Ewan, make yourself be known. Why don't you? Turn your audio on.
Where is he?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can, Ewan. Bless you. Come on.
The machinery is not very good.
No, it's good. We can hear you.
Good.
We can hear you.
Impressive, utterly impressive.
I want you to give 2 minutes as a preview for next month's lecture, Ewan, on the concept of the lighthouse and what you may or may not know about it.
No time for homework.
There are family connections, Ewan, aren't there?
I could just give a short one then. The Stevenson lighthouses are well written up. I know 2 books in particular. I'm still digging through my collection. If I find those titles, I'll pass them along. But Robert Louis Stevenson was known, certainly in the circles I moved in. He was reputed to have said, if you want to be a successful writer, write for the people whose lips can be seen moving when they read.
One of those useful little
yes.
What do they call them? Yes, but anyway, Ewan, it's great to have you on board. And
well, thank you for the invitation, which came only this afternoon.
That's right, you only had it this afternoon.
Yes.
And it's I hope you'll be back for the next one as well.
Well, I used to make ship models, and
I didn't know that.
I shelved the man who's the authority on 18th century rigging.
Ewan is an architect by qualification, aren't you? Yeah.
So, yes, I'll join you again.
That'll be great. Good to have you this evening, and stay you well. We'll speak very shortly.
Yes.
And who else have we got on? Let's have a look. David, you're down in the Southern Ocean. How are you this month? All right, David Blake. Are you okay?
Let me unmute.
You're on mute, that's right.
Alistair, I'm almost speechless, which means that I probably can't stop talking. I'm just speechless. Ingenuity of mankind, I think. Simon's book has just emphasized that. And earlier today, I was watching something. It's a play put on at the West End, I think, and it's about the Penley lifeboat disaster.
I've just read the book.
It's done with modeling, and it just somehow seems to sort of fit in today. That for me, in a champagne day, really, with just incredible knowledge being shared.
A quick note on the Penley, and God bless their souls, 16 souls lost, 8 of whom were the entire crew of the Penley lifeboat.
Yeah.
And that was on the night, I think, of the 17th or the 19th of December, 1981. It was just over 40 years ago. Unbelievable, helping call out, they called it in the RNLI, to a coaster that had lost power because it had got water through no fault of anybody into the fuel, and his position was wrong where he thought he was. He was just going around Land's End, southwest of England, for those who are overseas, and there was a southerly hurricane. It wasn't even a severe storm, it was a hurricane, and they were being pushed, he was being pushed, floated beam on to the wind into the shore, the south coast of Cornwall, at the rate of 1.5 knots. And through a number of unfortunate circumstances, there was some delay in launch of helicopter, in launch of lifeboats, because this chap actually underestimated, the skipper very bravely underestimated the problem, and it was left too late. It's the most amazing and very tragic story. I've literally finished reading the book 2 days ago. It's an extraordinary coincidence that we're all talking about that tonight. Anyway, but the ingenuity of models, it's quite incredible. I think it's a very strong message, and I think, Ian, you set that particular useful hair running in your response, that, you know, models should be used in telling history. We're in the age of digital invention where you don't need to be human. You can be a bot. Who needs these fantastic models when everything else is provided for you in 3 dimensions electronically? The answer is whoever stops listening to music, whoever stops reading a physical book, whoever stops getting on their knees and praying to the God they believe in. You know, these things are not replaced by experience. And I think my fascination with models, or my fascination with ships, goes back to the age when I was 8, I think. I was handed the Observer Book of Ships by the son of a friend of my parents who was a rating in the Navy in London, and he dressed up for the occasion and handed me the book. And that was the moment of magic I most remember from my childhood. So these things, however two-dimensional they may be in people's minds, are so important. I think this has been a wonderful evening. I get the feeling that we're now 25 past 8. You're probably 25 past 3 on the eastern seaboard. It's been wonderful to have our friends, not least you, Holly, from over the pond, and in South Africa, and in Hawaii, and I've missed out somewhere else.
Trinidad and Tobago.
And Trinidad, Tobago. We are getting so international. We're going to have to start putting subtitles in shortly.
Absolutely amazing.
It is absolutely fantastic, and I congratulate you, Simon, for attracting such a large audience. And once again, may I express my gratitude to all of you who are members of the NRG and the Society of Model Shipwrights for coming in to this evening's event. And I hope maybe some of you will come back, as we do have this most months, if not every month.
So, I was just going to quickly add, Alistair, to Ewan's piece on lighthouses. We've got an amazing model of the Eddystone Lighthouse by George Knott, which actually comes apart and shows all the different rooms. Oh, it's a beautiful thing, mid 18th century. You won a medal for it as well.
You and I will go and have a look at that. We ought to go and see it. I think that's fantastic. Thank you all for coming on. I think probably that's that. It's good to see you, David Hogman. It's good to see you, Solmaz from the home team. It's good to see you as well. I hope you're keeping well. Thanks for everything you've done during lockdown for us. We've got this exhibition. Hopefully we'll get it off the ground at Easter. Yeah, fingers crossed on that. And the Fates as well. Wonderful to see you, all the regulars. And Roger Francis, good to see you again. And John Hood. You must be related to.
Can I interrupt,
Good to see you.
I think we have representatives from half of the states in the United States tonight.
We have. We've done incredibly well.
Welcome all of you.
It's good to see you all, and we come back and see us next month or whenever you like.
A little bit from Canada as well.
And Canada, don't forget.
Hello, Canada.
Canada. Fantastic.
Many thanks.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. And all of you, if you're model boat builders, for heaven's sake, keep up the good work. I'm seeing models all over the place in the background. Paul Moore, Thomas Ruggiero. Oh, it's fantastic. It is wonderful seeing all these models. And Lawrence Herman, I think that's a model in the background there as well, isn't it? It looks very interesting backdrop, whatever it is. Anyway, I'm going on. I've got to stop.
I must leave anyway.
You've got to go and eat lunch or breakfast or whatever. So thank you for coming and good night.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Good night. Many thanks.
Thank you for inviting us.
Friends.
Thank you.